Welcome to episode 9 of Down and Dirty Tactics, Platoon Defense. I think you're going to see during this episode that despite being in the defense in a stationary position, there's actually some of the most amount of work in a non-military operation found in the defense. Now there's multiple reasons to conduct defense. The one that comes to mind based on movies and popular television is defending some piece of terrain or some piece of military hardware, be it an installation, infrastructure, etc. But it's not always the reason for conducting a defense. Defenses can also be done to gain time for another commander. So at the platoon level, for your company commander, gaining time in another area by having your platoon defend along an enemy's axis of advance. It could also be done to make the enemy vulnerable. If the enemy's been unwilling to come and commit to the fight, by conducting a defense over either a piece of terrain or something that he needs access to, you create a situation in which he gets to choose the time of the attack, and he needs access to the resource that you're defending. Therefore, he'll most likely come to the fight. He also will have to mass his forces to overcome your defense, which makes him vulnerable as he's creating a massed force. You can also execute the defense simply to kill the enemy. It's possible that the offensive operation is not ready to commence for some reason, but by putting a defensive position forward, you can engage the enemy from relative safety and begin to attrite his forces. Now, there's several fundamentals that are critical to a good defensive operation. One is good use of terrain. Two is knowledge of the enemy and what he is most likely going to do. Three is surprise in the defense. And four is the offensive mindset. It is absolutely critical that in the defense you have proper use of terrain. And what that means is maximizing the use of terrain to your advantage and minimizing use of terrain to the enemy's advantage. And that primarily comes in when choosing a defensive position. Next is knowledge of the enemy. It's useless to put a defensive position if the enemy can just bypass it, go around it, or ignore it. You have to know what the enemy's mission is and know how the enemy is most likely going to maneuver through the battle space in order to properly choose your defensive position to make it so it's not easily bypassable. Next is surprise. Just because you're not doing offensive operations with the entire platoon does not mean that you can't strive to have surprise in the defense. It's easy to think that the defense is a fixed position that the enemy is going to know about and that there's no surprise to be had, and that's a poor mindset to have going into the defensive operation. At the platoon level, the platoon commander has to do everything he or she can to prevent the enemy from knowing precise locations of obstacles, positions, or weapon systems. Just because the enemy may be able to identify the overall position doesn't mean that you can't achieve surprise in where your machine guns are located or when he hits certain triggers. And finally, for the fundamentals, we have offensive mindset. This one is probably the most important to a good defensive operation. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that I'm in the defense, therefore the enemy has to come to me, and that's simply wrong. As a defensive commander, you have a lot of options for offensive action. Reconnaissance patrols, listening posts and observation posts combined with long-range fires, ambush patrols at both the squad and the team level. There's a lot you can do to attack and kill the enemy before he even sees your position, and that's the mindset that you should strive to have in the defense. Now, there's several types of defensive positions that you can establish. You can have mobile defenses, area defenses, battle positions, strong points, perimeter defenses, reverse slope defenses. We're going to limit this episode to mostly the battle position and the perimeter defense because that is mostly what you would do at a squad level. For the rest of the episode, we're going to transition to covering a map and going through a defensive plan and briefly the defensive battle itself. Alright, we'll begin with this area. We'll say that the company commander has tasked your platoon, first platoon, with establishing a perimeter defense in this area in order to delay the enemy for at least one day. We begin our planning with doing a thorough MET-TC analysis, mission, enemy, troops, terrain and weather, time and space, and civil considerations. Our mission is to establish a defensive position in order to delay the enemy for 24 hours. Alright, now we know exactly what we have to achieve in effects. The enemy is located to the north and to the northwest, and we anticipate them attacking south. Overall in the area, the enemy is a company in size and typically operates in 20-man platoons. We have a platoon at our disposal with 3 squads, each with 2 teams of 5, and we also have 2 M240 machine guns. The terrain in this area is obviously heavily wooded, and there's a small hill in the middle of this road network. Additionally, we can see several high-speed avenues of approach, i.e. the roads, that move throughout our area, as well as what looks like several ravines, ridges, and valleys. The weather for our operation looks like it'll be clear and have no effect. The enemy has a great deal of maneuver space out in the open, but they're unlikely to do so to avoid our air superiority. We have to conduct this operation for 24 hours, so we should be able to bring in everything we need and not require a resupply. And there's no civilians in the area, and this is largely in an abandoned area of land, so there's not many civil considerations. Based on doing our MET-TC analysis, we determined that the enemy is most likely going to move through this area in one of two ways, either on the west or on the east, moving along these high-speed avenues of approach, the roads. Since we have air power and the enemy is afraid of being out in the open for a long period of time, we know that they're probably unlikely to try to go out in the open and bypass this area of woods. Looking at the terrain, where all of the black lines are the ridge lines or the high points, we determine that there's two good locations, either on the west in a large battle position or on the east in more of a linear battle position. This is the first big decision point for the platoon commander. Where do I really think the enemy is going to come so I know where to put my defensive position? Knowing the enemy, we know that the enemy doesn't like difficult terrain, so he's most likely going to avoid the significant terrain changes on the east side of the AO. So we're going to place our primary defense position on the west side. That doesn't necessarily mean that we get to ignore the east side, it just means that our main effort is going to be on the west. Next, we're going to go conduct a leader's recon and verify that this actually is the area that we need to establish our defense. Our leader's recon is going to be the actual leader, as well as a few security, probably a radio man, and maybe a McCorman. The recon goes out, is successful, and you determine that yes, this is the location I'm going to place my defense. The next decision that needs to be made here is where are we going to kill the enemy? This is called developing an engagement area. Ultimately, what we're going to do is make every effort to get the enemy to move into our engagement area, and we place most of our fires there. In this situation, it's pretty obvious that the enemy is going to have to enter a ravine along the road in order to come back out of it. That would be an ideal engagement area, as they'll have to fight uphill to be able to close with us, or fight uphill to be able to retreat. We'll make this engagement area hammer. Now that we have the general plan down, we're going to actually go load our defensive position. Our priorities of work are going to follow safe, security, avenues of approach, fields of fire, and entrenchment. So the first thing that we do upon arriving is gain 360-degree security. Now always remember, in the defense, you're in a resource-constrained environment. You're always going to want more manpower, and you're always going to want to do more things. So you really have to prioritize what's important to you. In this situation, we have to have security all around, and we have to have the ability to kill the enemy in engagement area hammer. From our analysis earlier, we've determined the enemy is very unlikely to come from our rear or from due south. Therefore, we obviously need to place most of our combat power towards engagement area hammer, and then a little bit also to the northeast. We can't completely forget about our rear, so we do have to have some level of security on that, but it doesn't need to be an entire battle position. What we've done by doing this prioritization is come up with two battle positions and an alternate battle position for our squads. Now we can't ignore the enemy's alternate course of action of moving down through the east on the high-speed avenue of approach. And the perfect response to this is going to be identify an alternate position, which we already have on the ridgeline, where we can move the entire platoon to and defend if the enemy chooses that course of action. And then additionally, we use an LPOP, a listening post, observation post. These are typically two-man elements that their entire purpose is to identify the enemy and report back to the platoon commander what they see. We'll place an LPOP to the east in order to monitor the enemy. We also need to place them in a location that will have enough time to move the platoon to a defensive position if we need to. We'll also place an LPOP in front of engagement area hammer so we can identify if the enemy is about to enter our area. Now we also want to maintain that offensive mindset in the defense. The perfect way to do that is via a patrolling effort. With our two battle positions and two LPOPs, we're obviously running out of manpower. And this is where I start talking about the resource-constrained environment. There's always more you want to do in the defense, and there's less and less people you have to do it when you start adding tasks. Don't forget, while these LPOPs are going out and your leaders' recons are occurring to find these alternate positions, everybody's digging in and building their defensive positions. So everyone is working very hard during this period as well. Because you're in a resource-constrained environment, you can't have too many patrols, so really we only have enough for one patrol at any given time. So that patrol needs to be achieving an effect. We know we don't want the enemy to go down the high-speed avenue of approach to the east, so we're going to make it extra difficult for him. And we're going to increase our chances of detecting him by putting a patrol out to the east. This is going to ensure that if the enemy gets by our LPOP, we have a patrol there that can, one, delay them so the rest of the platoon can move into position, and two, make it more difficult for them. If it's just reconnaissance efforts of the enemy moving down to the east, they may determine it's not worth it sending the entire enemy platoon or company down this area because we have a presence. Now we also have to ensure that our machine guns are set up to support our scheme maneuver. Obviously we want to kill the enemy in engagement area hammer, so we're going to weight our machine guns there. Now there's two kinds of missions that a machine gun can do, an individual machine gun crew. Those missions are a primary direction of fire or a final protective fire. In a primary direction of fire, you're giving that machine gun a direction that you want him to kill the enemy in as much way as possible. The other mission is an FPF, a final protective fire. This is the commander's last-ditch effort to avoid being overrun once the enemy comes in close, and it's going to be along the front of a friendly force with the intent of killing the enemy when he commits every bit of combat power at the last instant. Typically, you're going to have machine gun squads. That's two machine guns paired together. In this instance, we only have two machine gun teams. We're going to give them separate tasks, one per machine gun. And normally, you want to give a machine gun squad of two guns one task, so they're both doing the same thing and they can support each other. For this defense, we've given one machine gun a primary direction fire right down the road through engagement area hammer, and then we've placed another machine gun on our far left flank and given them a final protective fire mission right across the front of the squad battle position. In practice, this means that we'll have one machine gun engaging the enemy in our engagement area, and we'll have one machine gun holding its fire until the enemy is trying to close with and overrun our position, at which point they'll let loose with everything they have in an effort to stop that attack. Finally, we need to emplace our obstacles. Now, for those of you out there playing in airsoft or paintball and not milsim video games where you may not have the opportunity to actually place tactical wire, there's other obstacles that you can use other than the tactical wire, i.e. the C-wire or concertina wire that you might think of. Each obstacle has a specific effect, and you can achieve those effects with other things. For instance, the four effects that you're trying to achieve with an obstacle are to either block the enemy from moving through that area, disrupt the enemy's formations as he moves through that area, turn him onto a different route, or fix him in place so you can kill him in that area. There's also such things as natural obstacles for those that you can't build. Very thick vegetation is going to act as a fixing effect. You can have rivers act as turning or blocking obstacles, etc. Fallen logs that are stacked up into a wall might not be a great blocking obstacle because the enemy now can use cover behind it, but evenly spaced crossed logs that don't get stacked very high can work great for a fixing obstacle and slowing the enemy movement down, or disrupting obstacle and breaking up his formations as he moves through an area. Now, it's important to note that obstacles need to be covered by fire, otherwise the enemy can just do whatever they want to them. Also, when you're planning out your obstacle plan, don't forget how busy things are. Look at this position right here. We only have two squads that are actually in position right now. The other squad, your rear, is completely exposed because you have LPOPs out as well as a team-size patrol. You have everybody digging in. Everybody's very busy. So if you're going to add a lot of obstacles on top of this, somebody has to be available to go put them out and set them up. Now, for our obstacle plan, we're going to plan for 4 obstacles. Each of them 100 meters of tactical wire, so C-wire. Now, having 400 meters of wire is actually a lot of wire, and we would have to haul this stuff in, so it may be a little bit unrealistic, but for training purposes, we're going to call this realistic in that we have the ability to place it. We're going to place 3 of those obstacles in engagement area hammer. 2 of them are going to be on our flanks to channelize the enemy. So if the enemy attempts to escape from engagement area hammer, it's going to serve as a turning or a blocking obstacle, turning them back into the engagement area hammer. Also in engagement area hammer, we're going to have some protective wire along the same direction as our final protective fire. This way, if we have to fire our final protective fire, the enemy is going to run up against this blocking obstacle and have to get over it while they're under intense machine gun fire. And then finally, we're going to throw 100 meters of tactical wire down on the right flank of our other battle position, our second easternmost battle position. This is going to help ensure that if the enemy is able to swing out around, it gives the second battle position a little bit more time to engage the enemy if they try to bypass this position altogether. And now, after 10 minutes of drawing on a PowerPoint, we finally have a plan to execute a defense. And this is just the plan. And the enemy hasn't had a say on this at all. Consider about how much work this is going to go in. Also consider again that each of these battle positions have 2 teams that are digging in, so that's 10 people trying to build defensive positions. It'll take at least an hour, possibly 2, just to build a basic skirmisher trench, which is only going to give you a ability to defend from one direction, really. This is why the defense is so incredibly busy. There is a ton that has to get done, and very little time to do it if the enemy starts being aggressive right off the bat. We'll spend a very brief moment talking about the actual execution of this defense. We'll say that we were correct in our assessment. The enemy does come down our high-speed avenue of approach that we're defending. In an effort to get out of the open as quickly as possible, they're in a column marching on the road, moving quickly. Your LPOP spots them farther out before they even enter the woods. Now ideally, you would have some kind of indirect fire support, be it mortars, artillery, or air support, to be able to engage the enemy out here. We'll assume that you don't have that access. The enemy is able to close in within the woods, and as a good LPOP, it hides and does not engage. It only reports. The enemy moves past your LPOP, begins to enter EA hammer, and your machine guns open up on them. The enemy transitions from a column to a company online, as they should, and begins attacking into your defense through EA hammer. The platoon that's the furthest back has trouble actually entering EA hammer. It's just a line on the map. It doesn't know what EA hammer is, and if it did, it would want to stay out of it anyway. It's where you're trying to kill them. They also encounter a little bit of your turning wire and aren't able to completely rejoin their company, so they start attacking down on your west flank. At this point, engagement area hammer is fully developed. Your squad battle position is fully engaged with the enemy as they're continually entering engagement area hammer and attempting to close with your position. You're getting ready to fire your fire protective fire as the enemy continues to get closer and closer to your battle position. This begs the question, how do you deal with this platoon that is attempting to flank on the west? Well, in this instance, it seems pretty easy because you have a squad battle position that's not engaged at all. But what if it were engaged? What if there was enemy moving down that route as well? You have to use this concept called the least engaged unit, and it's a way of prioritizing where to pull reinforcements from in your own defense. Essentially, it's pretty obvious here that the one squad that's facing off against a company by itself is probably going to get overrun here if you don't do something. You have to find your least engaged unit to pull from them to be able to reinforce your one squad. In this instance, that's going to be the squad that is in the battle position to the northeast. You're going to pull as much as you can from them without compromising their position. This is the practice of using the least engaged unit to reinforce where you need it. If there were an enemy platoon attacking on the east as well as these 3 platoons attacking on the west, you would still pull troops out of the squad on the east to support the squad on the west, because the one on the east, your squad there, is still your least engaged unit. You would also most likely be recalling your easternmost patrol and possibly your eastern LPOP to come support the defense, depending on how dire the situation was becoming. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the platoon defense in a nutshell. There's a significant amount more detail that we can go into, especially when we start drilling down to what those squads are doing in the fight and what those squads are doing for preparation. But this is a broad brushstroke view of how to establish a platoon defense.